How's it going, everybody? I'm Austin with Apostles Attic, and we are back with another faithful dialogue. I have my friend Ryan here with me.
Hello, my name's Ryan. I'm with As It Is Written for all my personal stuff, so go check that out. And today we are going to have another one of our famous Faithful Dialogues.
All right, Ryan, are you ready to get started?
I am. It's a good
All right,
day
so
today.
it is a good day today. Today we're gonna do something a little bit different, and it's gonna be on the topic of science, and I think you are the perfect person for this conversation because you are very big into science, and when I first met you, it was the first time I met somebody who believed in the Bible, like that it had zero errors, but also really big into science. So those two worlds kind of meeting was really interesting to me. And so I wanted to have an episode where we talk about how, science isn't apart from God, it's really God's. And it's just our way of observing God is kind of how I'm kind of phrasing that, right?
Yeah,
So
so
I,
do you want me to get into it a little bit? So originally, actually, the queen of the sciences is what they called theology, which is the study of God. And the reason they called
okay.
that the queen of the sciences is because every other science is derived from understanding and knowing about God and His natural universe for us. And so all of the original scientists had a total and complete faith in God. You list any big names from any time before 1900, and they were believers in God. Even Charles Darwin was a Christian. So you look at Charles Darwin, but even Galileo, Copernicus, anybody that you could name, Sir Isaac Newton, from any time before the 1900s, they're all
They all
Christians,
believed in the Bible. Oh, wow.
and and they all believe that what they are doing by doing science is learning more about the nature of God. That was the reason why they were able to even do science at all. So if you look at the Chinese beliefs on religion and Buddhism and all of that sort of stuff, what the basic fundamental of their belief and the basic fundamental of all pagan beliefs is that the world is governed by forces that we can't know. So if there's a god of lightning that just decides to lightning bolt you whenever he wants to, that's not something you can study, and that's not something that you can understand and prepare for. He's just going to lightning bolt you whenever he wants to lightning bolt you. But the difference between Zeus and God is God's a rational and reasonable creator of the universe, and he created the universe with laws and with rules set in place that we can look at and understand and find out more about his nature by doing that. And so, yes, there are sometimes when miracles do occur, when supernatural events take place, but those are the exception and not the rule. And all of the original scientists who were Christians realized that. So,
Okay, wow. Um, so that's really interesting. Um, I'm thinking so I have a couple different points. I'm trying to think about this from like um an atheistic worldview. All right, so let's start from the ground up. Big Bang Theory. That's what let's say I believe in that, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, the that the word at the end there, theory, is very big, it's very important. But I'll go ahead and let you talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, so if you want kind of an explanation of theories, so in science, there's different levels of certainty that we have on physical phenomena. So we have what are called laws. One of the laws in science would be the law of gravity. So we've studied gravity so much that we believe it is a fundamental part of our universe and that we've given it a name, the law of gravity. And so you can't violate that law because we've seen that it works throughout the known universe. And so that's why it's called a law. Now, a theory is just short of being as confirmed as a law is. So, a law, we've dropped bowling balls from buildings, we've, sucked out all the air in vacuum chambers to test whether or not gravity still works there. We've done so many tests that we can be 100% sure that gravity works the way we think that it does based on where we are, on Earth. And so a theory is just short of that. They've done 99% of the uh of what you need to in order to confirm that it's a law. So a theory is just shy of being a law. So there's
What
some
is it
theory.
that they're sorry,
It's okay.
go finish your thought before I was gonna
Um,
okay then. I
yeah,
was
yeah,
gonna ask
just ask.
what are they waiting on to make it a law? Like what do
uh,
they need? What
just more confirmation.
okay.
It's just shy of being a law. So the difference between a theory and a law, some people will kind of use them not interchangeably, but some people will call it a theory of gravity, even though other scientists have defined it as a law. It's there isn't like a moment that it goes from being a theory to being a law, like by nature. It's more of we assign that to the theory. So somebody comes up with a hypothesis, and then that's tested, and then at a certain point people start calling it a theory, and then at a certain point after it's been tested even more they start calling it a law. So that's kind of the difference there. Were we talking about a specific law? I don't think so. I think I was kind of just going over the basics.
No, like the theory, like
Oh
why
yeah, yeah,
so the
sorry.
Big Bang is not a
Big Bang.
law. Yeah.
Yes. So the Big Bang theory, it's not a law because there's no way to actually test it. So we can't go and do a scientific experiment that proves that the Big Bang happened. It only happened once. It's a one-time event. We can't go back and prove without any shadow of a doubt that it happened. There is no way to do that. All we can do is look for evidence for it, and then we can be very sure that at one point something happened where we were all in one point together, and then things kind of spread out. So that's the current theory in science. And there's a lot of points in the theory that I agree with. The basic premise of the Big Bang theory is that our universe had a beginning. And that is something that Christians can agree with. Christians believe that at one point there was no universe, and then God popped that universe into existence somehow. And the Big Bang theory says that at one point there was no universe, and then that universe basically popped into existence somehow. And so at the most basic elements of it, they're very similar. Now, I might not agree with the time frames that take place and how long how old the universe is, and some other things tied into the Big Bang theory that would be necessary to 100% agree with that theory. But there's a lot of it that I agree with. Obviously, I agree that the universe is expanding. It appears as if it's expanding, at a rate that would indicate that the universe is so many billions of years old if it has been expanding at that exact same rate the whole time. And that's where I would fundamentally disagree with science, with modern science, is modern science believes that in what's called the steady state universe. At least they don't 100% believe in it, but that was the belief of people like Albert Einstein. And so those basic premises are still believed even today, where we know that the whole steady state theory is kind of junk,
Is
but
that where things are not decaying or something like that?
basically it
It's
says
just
that
consistently going.
it's saying that it's not that things don't decay, but it's saying that things happen gradually over time. I'm sorry, maybe it's not steady state theory, is it? Basically, there's a theory that says that things happen gradually over time. So, if you were to ask a scientist, how did the geology rock layers form that we see in the Grand Canyon? So you go and look at the Grand Canyon, and you can see a bunch of there's one layer that's kind of red. Below that, there's like a white layer. Below that, there's a brown layer, and then another red layer. And so a geologist would say, "Oh, well, that had to have taken 5 million years to form because there's five of those bands." I'm using random numbers, but those
Yeah,
are
that's fine.
it's similar to what they would say. They would say each one of those took 1 million years to form slowly over a long period of time. And what we found is that actually the way that things form on our planet generally is cataclysmic. And so what we see is that really something like Mount St. Helens happens. And so when Mount St. Helens blew up, there was a huge cataclysmic event. We can actually go see rock layers that formed that are just as
Oh
thick
wow.
as the ones that the geologists claim are millions of years old. We can see rock
Oh
layers
wow.
that didn't exist before the 80s. Then Mount St. Helens blows up, and now all these rock layers exist. And it's because things can happen quickly in geology, whereas science believes that everything happens slowly over time. So that's a big disagreement that I have with most scientists. They still
Okay.
believe so. There's other things like the speed of light. Science believes that the speed of light is a constant. You'll be taught that by every scientist in the entire world except for me. I'm like the only person that doesn't believe that light has always been 186,000 miles per second. I believe it's
You
completely
think
possible.
you think that the speed of light could have been faster earlier?
It could have been faster, could have been slower. All sorts of things could have been different
Oh,
about
interesting.
light, where we believe that that we know what light is and we know its speed. And the problem with that is we've only got a couple hundred years of good data. And so when you're trying to extrapolate out and tell me about something that happened 13 billion years ago, and you're telling me that our 100, 200 years of good data on light and the speed of light is enough to tell me that it's been that exact same speed for 13 billion years and there's nothing in the universe that could act on that to change it, I just don't believe you, right? There's no reason to have as much certainty as scientists do about anything. So another thing that you'll see scientists use to date the Earth or to date things in the Earth is radiocarbon decay. And so what they do is they believe that there is a steady state at which these radiation, that's not radiation, these
Carbon deposits or something like that?
yeah, so there's like a certain amount of radioactivity, and over a certain period of time, the atoms start decaying into different elements. So they'll start as one
Oh.
kind of uranium, and then they'll decay into other kinds of uranium. And so we use carbon for that as well. There's carbon atoms that are radioactive that decay at what we believe is a certain rate, but we've only been measuring that rate of decay for maximum 100 years, and in 100 years we haven't seen enough of a change to know that it's different. But if we did that same test over 1,000 years, we might start, it might start seeing that rate changes a little bit. And so if you try to extrapolate out and tell me that the rate of radiocarbon decay is the same today that it was 13 billion years ago, there's no way to prove that. And we don't have enough data collected to know that it's 100% the same today that it was 100 years ago.
Well, cause too, like, wouldn't it shatter everything if it did not, deteriorate at a constant rate? Wouldn't
Uh,
that literally make it pointless or something?
it would make it pointless as a tool to measure the age of
To
something.
date? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but the crazy thing is, like, let's take the speed of light. If the speed of light was different, that doesn't actually destroy anything about our universe or throw anything off. It's just not something that scientists can accept because it's a fundamental underlying belief that they've decided to have. They don't actually have data to prove it, but it's a core belief of what I believe is really a religion of science. So there's a lot of people out there that believe in science almost religiously. So if you tell them that
Well, it is
there's
a
a new
worldview, right?
uh science, it shouldn't be. So science should be a component of your worldview. So my worldview is basically colored by the fact that I believe in God. So that determines everything else about what I believe. Okay, so if something goes and is going against my belief in God, then I have to reevaluate that other thing, not reevaluate God. And so there is something else that scientists have decided is the fundamental of science, and that's what they put their belief and their trust in. And even when they see contrary evidence, they can throw that out because they believe that their view of science is the real one. And they put a whole lot of faith in that belief. And it's actually less well founded than my belief in Christianity. Because there's a lot of scientists that say that they don't believe in God because of science, and that's just an absurd belief. You have to have some other underlying belief that's telling you that God doesn't exist because science doesn't speak about it at all. Science has nothing to say about anything that exists outside of this universe. So if you're talking to somebody that's talking about a multiverse, they're really not talking about a multiverse. There is no such thing as a multiverse at all.
Is
It's
that
not even
just like another
possible.
theory,
So
or is
it's
it? Or,
So what
Sorry, go ahead.
people no, it's okay. What people don't understand is how small we thought the universe was even just 100 years ago. So before 100 years ago, we didn't know that there were other galaxies. So we thought the Milky Way was the entire universe. Okay? So we didn't have the word galaxy at that point because it wouldn't make sense. We just had the word universe. And so the entire Milky Way galaxy, what at that point we thought was our whole universe. And so
Oh, okay.
if you go back far enough, human beings have thought the whole universe at one point was just kind of the world. We've always known there were stars, but we didn't always know how far away they were. And so
Right.
the history of humanity is expanding our understanding of what the universe is and how big it is. And so if a scientist is telling you and talking to you as if there is another universe, that's complete nonsense and complete garbage. What they're really saying is that the real universe is bigger than we thought and that it works in ways we didn't quite understand before. Does that make sense? So
Yes, but
so just like the Milky Way galaxy we thought was the whole universe, we still used the word universe to describe the Milky Way galaxy, but we had to come up with another term for what a galaxy was to describe what a galaxy is because now we know there's billions and trillions of galaxies. Okay?
right.
Well, now we know that there might be billions and trillions of what we've labeled universe. Okay, there might be billions and trillions of those,
And it's just more galaxies or something?
but it's not more galaxies. It's the next step up that's bigger than a galaxy, and there might be millions or trillions of those in the universe.
What?
Okay,
Have we labeled that yet? Is there a name for that yet?
No, because it's not. We haven't seen it. Like you can look through a telescope and you can see
Uh
other
huh.
galaxies. You can't look through a telescope and see these other. I'm gonna call them
Step
multiverses.
ups.
Yeah, because we don't have a name for it. That. So I
Definitely
don't.
don't call it a multiverse. That doesn't that
Well,
doesn't help.
it, it it just leads to confusion because the real reason that scientists wanted to label it a multiverse, in my opinion, is because then that negates the need for God. So the whole entire reason they
Why?
called
What?
these things
Yeah.
other universes is so that they could claim that science is now talking about things that are outside of the universe. And then if science is talking about things that are outside of the universe, science can then make claims about God. Okay?
Why is it? How?
Because God is the only thing that exists outside of our universe that we could even know. We can't know
Okay.
about anything that exists outside of the universe except for God. And the only reason we know about God is because he's come in and interacted with our universe and revealed himself to us.
Okay.
But there is no way for us to interact with another universe. That's just not even a possibility. And so if our reality includes all of these other spaces that we're calling multiverses, then the real universe is just that much bigger. And it doesn't
Because that's
help.
supposed to be the overall encompassing umbrella term for everything that's, you
Yes,
know,
well, universe, the term unit and verse, the Greek roots, uni means one and verse means spoken word. And so what it's actually saying when you say the word universe is you're talking
it's like
about God. You're talking
the
about
thing that
God
God spoke into
speaking.
creation.
Exactly. So he did one
Wow.
verse to speak it in creation is kind of what it's saying. So
Well, is that Greek or Latin or what is that?
I
It's
believe it's
probably Greek,
I
right?
believe it's Greek. It could be Latin though. I get my Greek and Latin roots mixed up these days. When I was a kid, I knew it better. But I believe it's Greek. So basically, the multiverse is not the multiverse in the way that you think it is. It's all inside of our universe. Our universe is just bigger, in my opinion. That's how I would define it.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
because you can't. Um, the way we were using. So then, all right. Let me drop that tangent. I was about to go on. So if they're saying a multiverse, what are they trying to say? That God spoke other creations into things. That
So
there's other.
so
Yeah.
with the multiverse theory, in the ways that I've seen it used, it's generally used to try to say that God doesn't exist. So literally, because they're claiming that these other things exist outside of our universe, they then claim, well, we're just one of those things that popped into existence for right now, and later will pop out of existence, kind of a thing. It's totally crazy. I can't get into the specific science of it because I don't exactly
Doesn't
understand
sound
it.
like science. Yeah.
But it's very much not 100% science. And again, they're trying to claim these things are outside of our universe, but what the reality is we probably just underestimated how ridiculously big our universe is. And none of
We
that does.
also have
Yeah.
to. Sorry, continue.
No, no, you go, you go.
I was just gonna say we have to be like mindful of scientific institutions that make claims. Like we're all human and we're all capable of being in these scientific institutions. So we have to take all of this with a grain of salt. We can't just be like, oh, he's a scientist. He comes from this university. It is set in stone. Like you cannot. Like you're supposed to like human beings are gonna go out and collect data and interpret data. You don't have to just believe them. You can
Mm-hmm.
interpret what they have interpreted. And
Yep.
so it's you know,
Well, and anytime that I'm talking with somebody that truly trusts the science, I go and I ask them, so you're going to teach your kid out of a 1950s science textbook? And of course the answer is no, because we've learned a lot since the 1950s. The views
you'd
on,
want something updated, yeah.
of course, because science is radically different. Like there's theories in that 1950s textbook that we've proved wrong. Okay? So there's things that they believed as an absolute fact that we have proven isn't the case and that actually it's some other mechanism. And so we've been doing that for hundreds of years in science. The whole point of science is to try to understand the world better. And the reason, but yeah, so science is not something to put your faith or your trust in. It changes constantly. Not to mention, and that's not even mentioning the fact that currently what is going on in science right now is what's called the reproducibility crisis. So reproducibility is a big word that just means that you can do something exactly the same and get the same results. And that is the fundamental basis of science, is that you can test a theory that you have, or if you have an idea, you can go and you can test that in the real world. That's the basic definition of science. And what it has morphed into is what we call reproducibility. So when one scientist does an experiment, that scientist is going to write down meticulously every single step that they took and the amounts of everything that they used, and they're going to record exactly how they did that experiment. And then what they're going to do is they're going to write a paper on that experiment, and they're going to
And try to
send.
recreate it.
So
Yeah.
they're not going to try to recreate it. They're going to send it to somebody in New Zealand who tries to recreate it. Okay, and so if it's then not reproducible, then that is bunk science. It's not true, and you can toss it out and start over again. But what the problem that we're having with science today is over 50% of all scientific papers are not reproducible. And so we get
And
these.
so you believe the science before anyone ever can vet it, basically. And then we're over here dying on these hills that haven't even been vetted. And so
Mhm.
that makes a lot of sense to me. You just educated me on kind of like what's going on with like people in science today. One of the things I want to talk about, but I'm not going to. I'll just frame it in the I'll frame it in the lens of vaping, but understand this is code for something. And so vaping, we don't know really what's there's not a whole lot of data on it, and there's not like we do not know for sure. And like, man, I'm just gonna drop this whole tangent.
You
I'm just gonna drop it.
Yeah, okay. But
It
the basic premise is that anything that is untested is not science. Ultimately,
or
if so,
untestable, like or unrecreatable, or
well, if it's unrecreatable, then it's definitely not science. But before something is tested, it's not even science either. So if I go and I do an experiment and I get a result that I go do a unique experiment that's never been done before, I get a crazy result. That is not science yet. Okay,
that's an
it
anomaly until you can
that's
reproduce it a couple times, right?
exactly, because there could be something weird in the way that I did the process that people find out
Could have been
about. It could have
contaminated
been
or something.
contaminated. It could be the North American June beetle secretes some gas in June in Southern California. Like, I just made that up,
That's
but
in the air. Yeah, I know.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. But so that's why you have to send it to New Zealand where they don't have the North American June beetle or whatever it is, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Um There's all sorts of crazy things that can mess up an experiment and turn it from good science into complete junk. And so before something it has been reproduced and then reproduced again, it's not even real science. And most of what we see coming out of scientific institutions today, like universities and those sorts of places, is that exact thing. Complete theories, tests that they did, but that are never confirmed and never reproduced. Because it's expensive to reproduce a test. You've basically just doubled the amount of cost for everything, right? And you have to go get some other people to go do it. So you can't do it yourself. And you have to find, those people have to have funding to go do that test. So it's hard to get things tested, but that's the only way to make it real science. And so we see just complete garbage coming out of science these days, where they'll say, one day you'll see a report that says that drinking a glass of wine's good for your health. The next day you'll see that you need to drink 5 glasses of wine, and then today you find out that wine's a carcinogen and causes cancer. You get all sorts of different stuff, and that's because one test was testing for, how much wine helps out your pinky toe, and the other test was testing about how, what kind of effect wine has on your respiratory system or something, right? And one of them said that, oh yeah, it has a real good effect on your pinky toe. It's not, but and of course I'm using completely unserious and silly examples, but that's the level that it gets to, is you're testing the silly equivalent of your pinky toe in some of these tests, but because you use a bunch of mumbo jumbo science words to make it sound big and special and important, it sounds like it's a bigger deal than it really is. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways that we can get led astray by science today. And so that's the number one thing I want people to understand, is that it is not set in stone. If you go back, if you're 30 years old like me, or I'm 33, but if you go back to your high school textbook, you could read that today and you will find errors in it. You will find things that were wrong, that they thought were right at the time. Even if you've only been out of high school for 3 years, you can go and you can check a lot of the stuff in those textbooks and find that it's just straight wrong. And so the fact that people are saying trust the science, like that term, anybody who's ever used trust the science, just don't believe them. They're liars and they're trying to hurt you, okay? Like, that phrase is a signal in my brain. Throw out anything that person has to say because they're a complete idiot. Trust.
Or give it like a 3 times comb, really fine, go through that information, like super vet what they're saying. Don't, like, I
Uh,
don't know, like,
Honestly, there's
yeah.
there's so much information out there these days. It's not even worth going through what they have to say, because they won't have anything of any value. If you're saying trust the science, what you have to say has zero value on anything else, because you're either a liar or you're a complete idiot. Those are the only
So then
two options.
what what's kind of like what's kind of like science that you wouldn't be skeptical of? Like if somebody just goes, "Hey, I have this study that says this. I'm gonna post it here. It's
so
got some cool things. Check it out."
so
Like,
I
is
will I
that
will
kind of what you're
I will hold up an example of the science that I believe. This right here, this phone. See the cameras? Okay, I can take a picture with it and I can then look at it later. The only science that I trust is engineering. So if you put a physical device in my hand and claim it will do this device will make a phone call and you'll be able to call your aunt across the country. Okay, I can go test that and I can go see if I can call my aunt across the country. And if that works, that works. But at this point, that's the only science that I trust, is
so
if you
you're
can
not
put.
interested in any kind of speculation or any kind of like,
I,
yeah.
I'm interested in it. I'll look at it. I'll evaluate other things, but that's based on the fact that I don't trust it, right? Because
You
again,
approach it in a skeptical way.
but again, if somebody comes up to me and with medical science, and you're saying trust the science, I'm not going to
Oof,
trust
no.
you,
No,
okay?
no, no. That's your
But
body. Yeah.
but if you come up to me and you say that the sun's 93 million miles away from the Earth, okay, I can look into that, and I can,
That could
I
be
don't
true, yeah.
I don't trust it inherently anymore. I would have when I was younger, but I don't trust that inherently anymore. I would have to take that with a grain of salt. Okay, maybe in 100 years we'll find out that our methods were wrong somehow in determining that distance. But again, the only science that I trust is something that can be put into my hands that I can physically use, and it works the way that they claimed. Anything other than that these days, you have to completely just like if somebody comes up and tells you, yeah, the raptor evolved a claw and it took 1,000,000 years because we saw this one fossil that was 1,000,000 years older, and now there's this other fossil and it's got the claw now but it didn't have it before. I'm just gonna be like, how do you know that the claw didn't just like disintegrate on the other one, or like a T-Rex came by after it died and stomped on it in such a way that it just destroyed the claw, but the rest of the skeleton remained. Like, there's so many things that could be, especially archaeology. The number one science to completely just distrust and just like question everything is archaeology. Anybody trying to tell you about dinosaurs 65 million years ago, they don't know anything about what they're talking about. Anybody that's trying to tell you about Egyptology is the worst. It's not even a science. It's a religion, honestly. Egyptology is legitimately
It
like
should be like the study of culture, right? Of the Egyptian culture, ancient and modern and stuff like that, or what?
I think we should see it more as a soft science, like a so there's hard sciences like physics. Physics is trying to tell you how fast a beam of light goes, right? And so we can do specific measurements to see how far light travels and how fast that took, right? Egyptology and archaeology in general, what we're doing is we're going and we're uncovering things from the past. So, by the very basic definitions of science, it's not even a real science because I can't test anything. I can't
You're just
go.
making statements at that
Yeah,
point.
you're making speculations. It's an informed. Basically, archaeology is an informed guess about the past, and but no, and I'm not trying to belittle it. That's legitimately what it is. It's a very well informed in some cases guess about the past, but there's no science to it. There is no way I can't prove that the fragment the little thing that looks like a water channel that was used as an aqueduct 2,000 years ago. I don't know what they used it for. They could have been, having oil go down it to power their gasoline cars. I don't know what liquid specifically was running down this channel 2,000 years ago. I can make educated guesses on it, but I can't say with certainty what did or didn't exist. Right?
That
I can
makes sense.
so archaeology, specifically Egyptology, Egyptologists specifically have been lying about the timeline of the
I've
Egyptian
known about
culture
that. Yeah,
uh,
I've known about that.
because they want to make themselves more important, and so they want to say that they were the first culture to appear anywhere ever.
What's
Eh,
crazy is they kind of are, but when you take Genesis, right? You just have these tribes and camps and stuff, and then you've got Sodom and
so
Gomorrah, and you've got these like civilizations. But towards the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus, Egypt is just there, and I
yeah,
don't know
so
about any other places.
that's a regional thing. The Bible is a very regional book. It starts off for the first, what is it? Let's say about 10 chapters, and it's talking about global events. The flood was a global event that wasn't a regional Mesopotamian thing. You look at Adam and Eve. They were the first human beings. They weren't just the progenitors of the Mesopotamian culture. And so the first culture that we see exist in the Bible is actually the Babylonian. Or sorry, maybe not Babylonian in the technical sense, but the culture that
Babel.
existed around Babel, the Tower of Babel. So that would be the first culture. And so
What king was there? Was there a king there? Was it like
was
was it like
I don't remember if it says. Let me see.
who's the hunter of men? He was called like the hunter of men. Like he was like, was it Nero?
Oh, you're no, that's not Nero's a
Nimrod.
Nimrod. Yeah.
Was it Nimrod? Was he the Babel guy?
So there you're I think you're conflating a few different things.
I
Um
probably am. I don't know much.
it's okay. So there was a great hunter who did a lot of like hunting, and there's stories about him in multiple different uh like mythologies. Like I think Orion, the great hunter, I believe that he exists in multiple different mythologies, so he might have been a person that really existed in some sense. I believe that what you're thinking of is in the Bible there are different people who invented different technologies. So there is so you know how Cain killed Abel?
Yeah.
With the Rock, there is a descendant. I believe it's a descendant of Cain, but I could be wrong. There's a descendant, or there's somebody later on in the Bible named Tubal Cain, Tubal Cain, I believe, and he's the one credited with creating offensive like military weapons. So like probably the first spear or like sharpened stick type thing. So there are people that are credited in the Bible with creating different things, and there may I'm not claiming that this exists, but there may be a link between this Tubal Cain person who created the first like military weapons and this great hunter Orion, because they both have similar aspects to their story. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So ultimately, I put 100% of my faith into the Bible and into the texts that it contains, because what we see over and over and over again is that the Bible turns out to be completely accurate. Whereas science, again, if you go look at, even if you just graduated from high school this year, you go look at your high school textbook from freshman year, and there are things that are wrong in that textbook that we didn't know about literally just 4 years ago. Which is,
Yeah.
so how much faith can you put into something that changes that quickly? The answer is you can't. You can't put any faith into it, because tomorrow it's going to be different, and whatever presuppositions you made today are going to be wrong. Whereas the Bible has been true yesterday, today, and will be true forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even if we look scientifically at the Bible, even the scientific claims that the Bible makes aren't tainted by the beliefs of the people at the time. And what I mean by that, so let's take Moses, okay? Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. There's a few different names for that. One of them is the Torah, and so he wrote the Torah. And in the Torah, there's actually a lot of medical information and medical practices that Moses institutes among the Jewish people. One of them is hand washing, so he institutes ritualistic hand washing. The other big one that people talk about is pooping in the camp. So before that point, people in general were not wary about where they defecated, and so you would just dig a hole and kind of poop wherever you wanted. But what the Bible institutes is a limit on where you can and can't defecate. And they say if you want to go defecate because God's walking through your camp, don't do it in the camp, go outside the camp. And what we see is that that actually has a lot of very beneficial medical benefits. So the Jewish people who follow the hand washing that was instituted by Moses, and the Jewish people who follow the make sure you don't poop in the same place that you're eating, like when you do those sorts of things, you get better medical outcomes. And
Yeah, you're not getting diseases and stuff. Yeah.
exactly. But if you look at who Moses was trained by other humans, when he grew up until he was 40 years old, he lived in Egypt. And he specifically grew up in the Pharaoh's palace in Egypt. And so he was educated in all of the best Egyptian knowledge on medicine, on science, everything. And at the time, the height and the pinnacle of Egyptian medical technology was dung. So they had different dungs that you would rub in different wounds, that you would eat for different things, okay? And so literal poop. They're literally the Egyptian medical technology of the day was pour some poop in it. and
Oh,
and the crazy
just get
thing
a
is,
massive infection. Just go for it.
but what's crazy is if Moses just came up with this out of his own brain, he would have been using the Egyptian medical knowledge of the time. But we don't find that creeping into the text of the Bible ever. Not one time is a standard Egyptian medical practice found to be used and prescribed by Moses in the Torah. And so those things don't make that doesn't make any sense at all. Where did Moses find out that washing your hands to get the germs off of them was a good medical practice? Where did
They
Moses
didn't know about
find
germs.
exactly? We didn't know about germs until like 1900. We, we we've only very recently understood that washing your hands is a good idea. There's still hospitals today where they can't get all the doctors to wash their hands.
Oh
That's
no.
okay. That's how stupid human beings are. Even with the best medical training in the world, you still go, my hands are pretty clean.
Yeah, no, you
uh,
gotta sanitize that stuff.
so just to tell a funny story about how dumb people are. There was a hospital where they kept having these problems with doctors not washing their hands in between doing paperwork and going and seeing patients. And so they started doing all these crazy things. One of them was the wallpaper on everybody's background on their computers got changed to make sure you wash your hands. They had like wash your hands day, and they'd get people to come out and pass out flyers saying wash your hands. None of that worked. The only time that doctors, so we're talking about medical doctors, they went to school for decades to become doctors and learn the best science. The only way they could get them to actually start washing their hands was to start shaming people that don't wash their hands in meetings. So literally, they'd start off their office meeting with like, "All right, this week, Doctor Bob and Doctor, all these doctors that didn't wash their hands and shaming them publicly."
You're gross, wash your hands is yeah.
Well, and when you're dealing with people who are sick and are getting diseases and have wounds and blood, it's just insane. And so these are the smartest people. These are the people that are writing the textbooks. These are the people that are telling you what science is, and they don't even wash their hands, right?
Yeah.
So the level of respect and trust that you should have in human beings telling you something about science should be very small. Whereas the Bible got germ theory right 4,000 6,000 years before germ theory existed. That's crazy. That's something you should look into. That's something you can actually put your trust in once you start looking into every one of the details of the Bible.
When did do you know when germ theory first popped? Was it like were people drawing pictures of bacteria before they had like microscopes and stuff? This is also a
No, no, no,
massive
no, no.
tangent, but
People were definitely not. They had no idea what it was until you could see it. And so, let's see. Okay, there's something saying that ancient Judea might have had, or yeah, ancient India had some kind of theory. Ancient Judea, Middle Ages, early 19th. Looks like about the 19th, so 1800s. The earliest I'm seeing is 1838 for the actual germ theory. So it's that's less than 250 years old.
I
That's
want to remind people that
nothing.
like that the books that were written that instruct the Jews to not poop in the camp and to wash their hands. When were they written, Ryan? Like
6,000 years
4,000?
ago. So they were written about
Yeah.
4,000 BC, I think. Is
Yeah.
It's like it's some insane amount of time, like maybe 2,000 BC. So I've been 4,000 years ago.
Just remember an old like religious text that came out of ancient Judea, like oh man, already had knowledge about germs and stuff. So that's another way that like I'd say medical science is a science, right? We
Oh,
know
of
that if we
course,
wash
yes,
if we wash our hands, there we won't get sick. I mean, for the most part, and we can recreate that. We can test our hands before washing, and then wash them and test our hands afterwards, and see that the level of bacteria goes down and the level of stuff on it goes down, right? And so,
exactly.
it's one of those things where, like, you can I think this kind of stuff proves that like God is real because you
Oh
have
yeah,
a script a religious text coming from really like a time when science is just isn't a thing. From what we say science doesn't start happening until like later on when humans start to get going and stuff. But like we were talking about in another episode, pre-flood, there could have been tons of technology, like
mm-hmm,
all kinds of stuff. So we just really don't know. But
yeah.
all
Well,
right, do you,
and if this is something you're really interested in, I've got a series of
I
short
am.
videos on
Yeah.
YouTube. So you can check that out, youtube.com/ at as it is written. And I have
Ooh, I'll have to check those out.
yeah, I've got a series of videos called Scientifically Accurate Bible Claims. So SABC, I believe, is how you can
Ooh,
find the playlist. So check that out.
okay.
There's a lot of different things in the Bible that turn out to be completely scientifically accurate that are just they're just insane. Like I don't know any other way to say it. Like in I believe it's in Job. Job, God, somebody. Let me restate that. In Job, I'm not sure who says it. I don't remember specifically in the text, but I believe God says that the earth hangs on nothing.
Is it
Okay.
just floating there, right?
It doesn't explain anything. It doesn't
It's
explain
just
that
saying
statement.
that.
It just says it as a fact. It just says the earth hangs on nothing. Fact. And I'm just like, "Oh, you mean we didn't we we didn't know that for a fact as human beings until, 1700, 1600." But you look at the Bible and it's making this claim. Job is the earliest book, so the stories in Job come from they happen even before Genesis was written. So
Okay.
yeah, so
Um. All right. Sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead.
it's okay. I'm good. We can move on to your next question
Yeah.
for
So
me.
the next topic that I have, it's pretty big, but I feel like we can kind of cover most of it, and it's evolution.
Okay.
So if your worldview is basically that Big Bang Theory started everything, then you're probably in the camp that believes that evolution is right, So if you could touch on what evolution is and what the modern science is on that.
Yeah. So I'll just start off by saying that there are a lot of Christians who believe in evolution, and I don't believe that this is something that is salvific in nature. I don't believe you need to believe in the literal 6 days of creation in order to be saved. Personally, that's what I believe, is that the earth was created in a literal, or not 24-hour period, because there weren't necessarily hours, but whatever one day was a day in the period of time that the earth was created. So, I don't it tells you one day, and it says from evening till morning. So in my opinion, the earth was created in 6 days. Human beings were created out of the dust from the ground, and all that kind of stuff. So that's my opinion. That's my belief. But you are entitled to your own opinions and beliefs based on what you understand. Now, what is evolution? So evolution is two different things. There's two kinds of evolution that you will hear conflated quite frequently by people who support that theory. So evolution, like I said, there's two kinds. There's microevolution, and I believe in microevolution. So we can see and we can test microevolution in in like bacteria and stuff, even in finches. So originally, when Darwin was at the Galapagos Islands and he was taking sketches of his Darwin's finches, what he was doing is he was actually witnessing the process of microevolution. And so what microevolution is it's changes in species, uh it's changes within a species. And so what Darwin observed on the Galapagos Islands was finches. And so he saw them over the course of a couple different years, and he noticed that one year their beaks were longer and narrower so they could get to seeds that were stuck in these cracks. The next year things had changed and they needed to have shorter and fatter beaks to crack open the shells on thicker nuts. Okay, and so what he saw in the in that one year is is called natural selection. And so he saw that that species needed longer beaks in order to survive one year and needed shorter beaks in order to survive the next. And so those specimens, they did better and they reproduced. And so those are small changes within a species that we see. So dogs, we can see differences between dog breeds. You've got these small little Maltese dogs that are just miniature little things, and you have Great Danes. Those are both dogs. And so what we see are massive variations within species over time, especially with dogs and other animals. We can see them change. But what we have never seen, what we have zero record of, there is absolutely no record of any kind of macroevolution. So microevolution is small changes within a species that happen that can happen fairly quickly. Macroevolution is the change from one species into another species, something we've never seen, we could never possibly see, and that we have absolutely no evidence for in the fossil record. And so Macroevolution makes the claim that different species can come and develop out of these changes within a species. So they're saying if you give something billions of years or millions of years, it will go from a single celled organism. Changes within that single celled organism will allow it to become a multi celled organism, and then changes within that multi celled organism will allow it to go and exist as a different species, as a completely different organism. And so, macroevolution, there is zero evidence for. You actually try to find evidence for evolution, just doesn't exist. Microevolution, total, complete, perfect, beautiful evidence for microevolution. We see that every day. So that's kind of the and so they try to conflate those two beliefs into the same thing to say that they're the law of microevolution, the law of natural selection. They try to then claim that that makes evolution more of a credible theory, and the reality is that it's not credible in the slightest. And
Yeah.
and the other thing that evolution doesn't answer that everybody thinks it does is it doesn't answer where life came from. So let's say that there was a single-celled organism that existed and that all life derives from that single-celled organism.
Where that one come from? Yeah.
Exactly. Where did that one come from? And one of the experiments that I was taught in my honors high school biology class, so the high school that I went to, it was one of the top 500 high schools in the country for public schools. Okay, so this isn't some slouch, horrible, unfunded public high school. This is like the top of the best high school in the district and one of the best high schools in the country. And the high school biology textbook that I used had a completely 100% debunked experiment in it. So there was an experiment that talked about how you could recreate the early Earth in like basically an aquarium. And so they dumped a bunch of random chemicals that they believed existed in the early Earth's atmosphere, and then added some lightning sparks into it, and claimed that they could get some not life out of it, but that they could get biological material. So building blocks for life coming out of this primordial ooze. Now, by the time that I had been in this class back in the early 2000s, this would have been about actually would have been the year 2004. So back in 2004 when I was taking this, they already knew that the experiment that they did was complete bunk. It was done back in the 1950s, and our understanding of what was in the atmosphere of the early Earth was radically wrong. So the components that they put into the experiment were completely wrong. And then, of course, the results that they get from it couldn't be used anyway. And so this completely debunked, completely idiotic experiment that everybody knows is completely insane to still believe in was put into my honors high school biology textbook because they needed something to tell kids, oh yeah, life could have come out of nowhere. Life could have come from nothing. There could have been a lightning bolt on a 4 billion-year-old Earth in a pond, and that pond could have had a single-celled organism come out of it and live and reproduce. So that still showed up in my high school textbook, even though it was completely debunked, just because it answered a question that kids would have. Because you could never teach a kid evolution and have them believe it unless you have an answer to the question, all right, so where did the first life come from? But the answer is that science has no idea. We have no idea how that first cell could have been created. We're nowhere near recreating it in a lab. We have no idea how to even remotely make a cell, let alone a cell that will reproduce in some way, either asexually by splitting apart in half, or sexually by mating with another of its species. So it's just completely insane to say that science has an answer to where the universe came from, because the ultimately science can't even speak to it. And right now, our best understanding of science, we have no idea where life came from. So, does that answer your questions? Do you have any more like follow up questions on evolution? Did I cover everything?
No, I'm just taking it all in. I'm learning a lot. Like you're catching me up on a lot of different modern stuff because I don't look into like scientific publications. I imagine you do, and so
I don't specifically look into the publications, but I'll watch YouTube videos, and I try to stay up to date as best I can on on different things in science. Like I love astronomy. That's my favorite science. I've always loved Star Wars and Star Trek, and it'd be
All
great
right,
if we
well,
could.
let's talk
Yeah.
about that. Let's
Okay.
talk about astronomy.
What about it?
Let's
What
talk
do you
about
want to know?
astronomy.
Well, first off,
Um,
it's astronomy, not astrology. Astrology is an evil,
yeah,
wicked.
I totally messed that up, my bad.
Well, no, but that's something that people commonly mess up. People will say astrology when they mean astronomy, and vice versa. So the difference between astronomy and astrology is astronomy is a science that wants to look at stars and look at things that we can see in our universe and come to an understanding of a better understanding of what our universe is based on that. Whereas astrology, what astrology is they take what we see from the stars and try to use that to dictate what is going to happen in your personal life. And so that's completely absurd. It is evil and wrong, and nobody should have anything to do with astrology. The zodiac is evil. The original the original use for the zodiac was actually to tell the story of creation and to tell the story of salvation. I believe that's my belief. And originally, or at least in Hebrew, it's called the Mazaroth. So that's a whole different subject. But yeah, don't have anything to do with astrology. Astronomy is pretty cool, but some of the things that astronomers say can be pretty absurd. Like when they say that that the universe is 14 billion years old and all that other stuff that they claim. I don't believe any of that personally. I believe that the Earth is much, much, much younger than billions of years old, not even millions or hundreds of thousands. Um, but yeah, so what kind of questions do you have about astronomy? So it's a pretty broad topic.
All right. Let's talk about so it's the study of stars and what we can see and to come to an understanding of that. So
Mm-hmm.
let's just start from a baseline. What is a star?
All right. So a star is actually a very, very simple object as far as what it's made out of. Generally, it's going to be made out of mostly one or two elements. So most of a star is going to be hydrogen, which is the lightest element. There's only one proton in a hydrogen atom. It's got one proton and one electron. And a star is going to be made up almost exclusively of hydrogen. And so what happens is a star is a ball of this hydrogen. It's not a gas, actually, it's technically a plasma, which is a different state of matter. And so you have this giant plasma ball of hydrogen, and it's so completely heavy and has so much weight that at the very center of it, it's got so much pressure that the the hydrogen atoms actually end up fusing together. Okay, so there's so much weight that the atoms fuse together and they form hydrogen. Or sorry,
That's crazy.
they form helium. So two hydrogen atoms fuse together and out pops a helium atom. And so a helium atom has two protons and two electrons, I believe.
What are
And so
protons and electrons?
so in an atom, so we have a basic atom. I'll look up a picture for you right here. In a basic atom, there are two different areas. There's the area where the called the nucleus. Let me see if I can pull this up for us. Okay. So, can't just give me a big picture of something anymore, can we? Uh, okay. There we go. That's close enough. So, let me go over to the right scene and just want to see this. And there we go. Close enough.
Yes.
All right. So we've got a little diagram of an atom. And so this is not a helium atom. And the reason that I can tell that, or it's not a hydrogen atom, it's not a hydrogen or
So doesn't
helium.
it have two protons?
Yes. So a helium atom would have two protons. This one has three, which would make it the next element up. I can't remember off the top of my head which one that is. And it has a bunch of electrons. And so the inside part where these white and red balls are, those are the white balls are called neutrons. They have a neutral charge. The red balls have a positive charge called protons. And then orbiting around the nucleus, we have the electrons. And so,
What was the proton again?
the proton's a positively charged part thing inside of the nucleus of an atom. So it's that red ball. And so the number of protons determines what kind of an atom it is. If it only has one proton, it's hydrogen. If it has two protons, it's helium. If it has a whole bunch of protons, then it's uranium. Okay? And so the number of protons determines a lot about it. Its atomic weight is determined by protons, I believe. And yeah. So that's just kind of the basics of what an atom is. So everything in the universe is made of atoms. But what's crazy is this picture doesn't do it justice. The size difference between the nucleus and the electrons is absolutely astounding. So if the nucleus of the proton was the size of this house, the electrons would be like out past the orbit of the moon or something crazy. I don't know the actual numbers.
Kind of solar system almost.
It
It's
is.
crazy.
It looks like that. It doesn't actually act like that. So when you're learning it in high school, at least when I did, a lot of teachers explain it like there's like these electrons are in an orbit, almost like they're like the moon is in orbit around the Earth. They're not quite in an orbit around the nucleus. So electrons, you can't actually determine where an electron is. So I know that sounds crazy, but
You just
we don't
know that it's going in a range, like a circle range or something.
we know that at one point it pops up at this part of the atom, and then at another point it pops up in another part of the atom. But it's not orbiting
Oh,
it like a planet orbits the Earth, or like the moon orbits the Earth. There we go.
it's just
Um,
everywhere.
I don't know how to explain it. So the other crazy thing is, so you take this nucleus right here. This is not to scale at all. The nucleus, the protons and the neutrons are far bigger than electrons, like just orders of magnitude bigger than electrons. And these electrons would be way farther out. So 99% of the inside of an atom. So if I go and I touch you, like if I were to try to high five you, okay, when our hands meet, they don't actually touch. Our protons, the protons of those atoms, aren't touching. What's happening when two atoms meet each other is they are repelled
The
by
electrons
their
touch each other.
electrons. Yes,
Yeah.
well, the electrons don't even touch each other either. So it's the same as a magnet. So you know how when you have a magnet, you've got the two negative sides that are coming close to each other? What
And they
happens
will
if you
not touch.
and they
Yeah.
will not touch, okay? So that's the same exact thing that's happening with the atom here. It will not touch another atom because it's being electrically repelled by the electron, or magnetically repelled. It is being negatively repelled by the other electrons. Yeah,
Is
I'm
that why
misspeaking
things
a little bit.
aren't intangible? That's why we can't just like stick our hands through walls and stuff.
So yeah, that's what gives everything the appearance of solidity or of being solid. But in reality,
Interesting.
most of reality is complete empty space. Even most of your body is empty space. 99% of you is empty.
Oof,
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
that's weird. Yeah.
So that's really weird, and from diagrams like this, it's really hard to
Picture it.
understand
Yeah.
that because we think of it being like this really small little like close thing, but in reality, there's a huge distance between. Well, not huge in the nominal sense, but huge in a relative sense between protons and neutrons and the orbiting electrons. And the other thing is they're not orbiting it; they're in what's called a cloud. They've since updated the term from when I was taught this to they're in an electron cloud. So we don't know where they are. It looks more like
It's
a
just
cloud.
they're everywhere in the cloud. If you try to detect it over here, it's there. If you try to detect it over here, it's there. If you just try to detect it over here, it's there.
Um,
Like
it's so it has a location. It's just the what when you're looking at objects this small, you start to have issues of you actually looking at it changes its nature. So if I try to measure where an electron is, that changes where that electron is. So by measuring it, it makes it a little bit different.
Can you explain why that is?
So like, okay, the easiest way I can explain it is if I take, so let's say that this phone, I want to measure it, right? So let's say I want to measure it, and I want to take a ruler and go measure it. Okay, so let's say that, imagine my pen's a ruler. I'm moving the space of it by adding the pen to it. So even if I do my best, I'm holding
Oh,
this.
as
As
soon
soon
as
as the
your
pen
device to
touches,
measure it, yeah.
it touches it. So now it doesn't change the length, but that changes where it's at in the universe. When the pen touches that, it pushes down on the phone. So
So
even
you're
in this,
saying as soon as your device to measure or locate the thing comes into play, then it moves it.
exactly, it change. I wouldn't say moves it, but it changes where it looks like it shows up. Does that
Interesting.
make sense? So
Yeah, that's
it's not
interesting.
you. As soon as you start trying to take pictures of these things, it starts to affect. Yeah.
Starts to get
So
weird, yeah.
yeah. So all right, I think that's a good explanation of the atom. What else is there? So stars. Okay, so stars are just the most massive objects that are basically all one or two. There's a little bit of all the elements in stars, but mostly it's hydrogen and a little bit of helium. But
Okay.
what will happen in the center of a star is as it ages, it will create more and more helium, and then that helium will start fusing into another element, and so we can get elements as heavy all the way up to iron out of the standard normal star. And
Wow.
so that all the elements up to iron are fused together in a star's core over the course of its lifetime. Uh, and
So
then
then when that star explodes, then all of those things get like scattered abroad, right? The
okay,
iron and all the other stuff, or
so that is that's one dispersal mechanism, but then the other thing that happens in a supernova is that actually fuses together more elements. So
what's a supernova?
a supernova is when a star explodes, like you were talking about. And
Okay.
so a star will do that at the end of its lifetime, uh, basically because the chemical makeup of the star is so radically different than it was because it's been fusing together these different elements. And so at a
For so
certain
long and
point,
storing it up inside of
mm-hmm,
itself, and yeah.
yeah. And so at a certain point, it will reach a point where it will explode, and in the supernova process, a ton of elements are made. So that's how we get gold. That's how we get a bunch of the heavier elements, all the way up to uranium, are from different kinds of
Like all
stars.
the metals and stuff.
A lot of them. So iron. You can make iron just in the normal core of a standard yellow type star. Uh,
Okay, like our sun.
like our sun. But what you'll see is that the our sun is not big enough to go supernova. So there's a Chandrasekhar limit. It's the name of a scientist, an Indian scientist. And what he determined is that you need to have a star that I believe is 1.6 times the mass of our sun. I could be completely wrong on that number, but basically you need to have a bigger star than what our sun is before it can even go supernova. It doesn't have enough mass to trigger that kind of an explosion if
So
it's
would it just
smaller.
cool down? Would it just
So what's going to
yeah.
happen with our sun just being a normal yellow star, it's going to use up all of its fuel. So the fuel for this nuclear, for this fusion, this fusion process is the hydrogen, and then it's the helium, and then it's elements
Where
all
is
the
it
way up
getting
to
that stuff?
iron.
Is it where is it getting the elements to do fusion? Is
So
it
the
just inside of itself?
so okay, let's go back to let's look at. I'm going to be using the Big Bang theory to explain this, but I don't necessarily believe that had to happen. Okay, just I know that sounds weird, but I'm going to use the understanding that we have of the universe from the Big Bang theory to explain this. But it could have been that God just made it that way, so that's also a possibility as well. I'm not discounting that, but what we've observed and what we see, we believe that at one point the entire universe was just hydrogen. And so at some point, you actually take all of
Clouds
that
of
hydrogen.
gas.
Well, yeah, and so at some point, it wasn't even clouds. At one point, it was a singularity. And so there was one point that was the whole universe that wasn't even big enough to measure. And so for some reason, that point starts expanding. As soon as that point starts expanding, there are a bunch of free floating protons and a bunch of that are just floating around the universe. So this isn't even a state of matter that we have in stars. It was as hot and and energetic as it could possibly be right after the moment of the Big Bang.
So like
So
above plasma.
yes, and so as the universe keeps expanding, things keep cooling down. And so what we see is that as soon as it starts cooling down to the point where protons are not just this like I'm trying to it's basically like there was this big soup of protons. So right now we can't even imagine what that is because
There's no space in between all the protons. It's just all
yes,
there.
they're all it's almost like a liquid or even a solid of protons, which is just a weird concept. And so that expands and cools, and so eventually the protons are able to separate from each other and start forming individual atoms.
Atoms.
And so
Yeah.
once those atoms are formed, now there's a bunch of clouds of hydrogen gas that are floating around. So once you have these clouds of hydrogen gas floating around, gravity starts to work on them, and so you'll see clumps.
Pulls them in.
And so as soon as a clump of atoms starts to form, more atoms are going to be attracted to that, and it keeps building and building and building from there until you get ultimately a star.
Gravity.
Well,
Yeah.
it starts with
Does
gravity. Every
Does
single
it create
atom.
heat? Like everything pushing on itself, does that create enough heat to where it molts something eventually?
So originally, the universe was hotter. What we've seen is actually the universe has been cooling down since. Again, this is all using the Big Bang theory as the science that
Kind of a
I'm
lens or a model.
yeah. So I don't
Yeah.
necessarily believe that this is exactly what happened, but this is what the current theories are in science. I just want to make that doubly clear. Um, and so what science teaches currently is that the universe started expanding, protons got cooler, formed into atoms of hydrogen, and then these hydrogen atoms, because gravity works even on individual atoms, you get a clump of two or three atoms, and that's going to have more gravity than one atom, and so it's going to start pulling a bunch of atoms together. And so at some point you have enough atoms that it's heavy enough and it starts the process of nuclear fusion. And so that nuclear fusion happens because of the weight of all of the other atoms pushing in from the surface.
Huh.
And so
Okay.
that eventually you get enough gravity that it starts nuclear fusion, and that turns the star on and makes it bright and makes it shine like our sun.
Okay. So it starts to it lights up eventually. It's like it's like if you have did you know that it's like a certain type of like manure or landfill or it's just like wood chips or something, but if you put a bunch of like grass and wood chips in a pile, it'll eventually get hot in the very center of it and enough to
Yep.
start smoking and even catch a fire. Isn't that weird?
Mm-hmm.
Like so I imagine it's something like that. Eventually it just lights up. It just turns on, it's hot enough to where a flame happens and then it really starts cooking, right?
Um.
So
So it's one thing to um keep in mind is it's not a fire like you're lighting a log of wood on fire. That's not what we're talking about. So what this is it's even hotter and even more. It's even more insane. Like so like you take a piece of wood and you light it on fire. What's happening is you're changing the nature of those of the wood and you're burning it and it's becoming different and less, okay? What's happening in a fusion explosion is you're creating a new bigger atom. So it's actually like the opposite.
oh,
So
whoa.
so if I
That's
take a
weird.
piece of wood and I burn it, I get less. It
You get
turns into a
ash. Yeah.
degraded version of the wood. There is something that was there that is now not there. Whereas with nuclear fusion, I now have something new that didn't exist before. I have a helium atom. I went from a hydrogen
Whoa.
atom, now from two hydrogen atoms, now I have one helium atom. Whereas I went from one log to now I have many ash particles, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of, so it's not like the sun isn't burning like a wood campfire, it's fusing. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's something completely different, which is
yeah, and
cool.
the what's crazy is how much more power nuclear fusion has than nuclear fission. So nuclear fission
What are
is
those?
like a,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So nuclear fission is an atom bomb. So the atom bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and all of the atom bombs before the hydrogen bomb were fission bombs. And what that means is that you're ripping apart a huge atom. So
How does
hydrogen,
that happen, by the way? Can I ask you about that small tangent? How do they split atoms?
how do they do it? Very carefully, but no.
Is
It takes a lot of force, and so with a,
okay.
with nuclear bombs, what they'll actually do sometime to ignite. I'm not even gonna explain it because I don't understand. I don't understand the process by which you rip apart a uranium atom. But the process that does it releases an incredible amount of energy, just massive. And but that pales in comparison to how much energy is released when you fuse two atoms together. So the energy you get from ripping them apart is a lot, but when you fuse two atoms together, it's exponentially even more. And so the original atom bombs were all fission bombs, but then at a certain point, they created what's called a hydrogen bomb. And a hydrogen bomb is a fusion bomb. And it's called hydrogen because they're taking atoms of hydrogen and they're fusing them together. And what's crazy is in order for a hydrogen bomb to work, they actually set it off using a fission bomb. So they'll take
Uh,
one of the so they'll take one of the bombs that they a similar type of device to what they dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they use that to kick
is it two
off.
explosions? Is it like boom, boom? Is it like a second one?
Basically, yeah. I don't know. It's probably so lightning fast that it doesn't even register as two like
But
independent
that's how it kicks it
explosions.
off. That's the catalyst for it. Oh, okay.
Because what you're doing is you have to create an environment where there's enough force and energy to
To
fuse
fuse two
the
atoms. Yeah.
hydrogen atoms together. And the only mechanism we have to make enough force and energy to fuse two hydrogen atoms together is if we rip a uranium atom apart.
Oh,
Not
that's
one, but a lot.
insane.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
so
Okay.
uranium has, it's like 200 or like a ton of different, not 200, it's like over 100 protons. So
What does uranium have applications outside of weaponry? Like because it has so many protons, can it be used for like powering cities or something?
oh yeah, absolutely. So right now we have nuclear power stations that are powering.
Oh, that's what those are, like San Onofre and stuff like that. That's what those are.
Not all of them are working on the same technologies, and not all of them use plutonium or uranium necessarily. But yeah, they're all nuclear in that way. So what they're
Okay, so they
doing,
generate energy and then they send that energy into like cells and then they tap into those cells or something like that or
no. So what they're doing is they generate heat, and then that heat turns steam engines.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So everything, basically, all of your like power comes from heat turning,
Steam.
not even, not necessarily steam, because diesel and gasoline engines don't use steam. But hydroelectric power is based on water. Nuclear power is based on water. Yeah. So
That's interesting.
most of our power is all of our power is from movement except for solar power. So solar power,
Ah,
literally, there is a reaction that happens because of the special kind of rocks that they use,
it
and then,
charges the rocks and then they take the
well,
energy and
the light hits the rocks, bounces off of it in such a way that produces electricity.
that's
Whereas
interesting.
every other form of power that you have in your life is some kind of a movement. So hydroelectric power is water in a river rushing down and turning a turbine. Nuclear power is steam getting heated up by a nuclear reaction to the point where it turns a turbine. You look at
You got
diesel or
wind
gasoline.
power. Yeah.
Well, wind power is wind turning a big turbine. Diesel or gasoline is an explosion that's turning your
It's turning
yeah,
it's turning something,
a
and then
crank, yeah, the drive, yeah,
gears are locked into that move your stuff. Yeah, I could be more technical with that. Yeah, but
exactly. So it's all based on movement except for solar, which is interesting. So
almost every motor is a cylinder spinning.
hmm
It's some kind of thing like a block with a cylinder sticking out the side, and it gets that cylinder to spin really fast. And then the whole concept of everything is just attaching stuff to that thing that's spinning and
yep,
making it do more work. And so,
exactly. But yeah, so that's a little bit about that. And then so stars are just big balls of this hydrogen and some other elements, but most of them are like 99% hydrogen. So, oh, one
okay,
interesting thing that a lot of people don't know, if you look at any single point of light in the night sky and you call it a star, there is a 50% chance that you're wrong.
that it could be a remnant of an explosion.
Well, not because that's a good guess. That's a very good guess. But actually, most single points of light in the night sky are either binary star systems or more than or more than two stars.
What does that mean?
So you know how in Star Wars, when Luke's standing on Tatooine and he sees the two suns in the sky, that's a binary star system. There's two stars in that system.
They don't act upon each other or pull each other in or anything like
They
that.
do. They do. They orbit around each other. So generally, if the
Oh,
stars are
they're just like swinging, but they're not
so,
actually gonna get pulled into each other.
I'll show you because I guess you didn't know this. You know what? Let's do I have it loaded? Do I have Universe Sandbox?
Honestly, science in school is boring, and I'm somebody that if you just show me some cool little interactive thing, that I would get it so well,
Yeah,
you know.
I'm starting up a program called Universe Sandbox.
Oh, I know
And
about that.
okay. So Universe Sandbox is really cool. And I will look into if it starts up. I will show you. Oh, you know what? It's not going to be. It won't work on this thing, so I won't be able to do it. Oh, maybe I will.
You can do display capture or like a game
No,
capture.
no. So I'm logged in on Steam on another account on this computer. So I have the game. The game exists on this computer. I don't know if I'll be able to play it. Oh, it looks like I can.
Oh, oh, I see. Your family sharing.
Kinda, yeah. Okay. So I'm starting up Universe Sandbox, which is horribly pixelated you. So that's fun.
That's
uh,
okay.
yeah.
I'll just I'll just black me out. Don't even worry.
It might have to update. I'm gonna. I think it has to update, so I'm gonna stop. It's not worth 20 minutes of figuring that out. I might have that up for next time if we have something a little bit more.
Yeah, that'd be really fun to play with.
All right. So here, why
All
don't you
right.
bring your video back? I think. Yeah, you're a little bit better now. Um. So basically, a most of the points of light that we see in our night sky are binary star systems. And so here's a. I'm gonna go back to web page. There we go. So it'll look something a little bit like that. Do you see? Can you see that?
Oh, wait, go up, scroll up. First picture, binary star system, right there, right there. First picture with the
Yeah,
rings, the solar system ring.
but it
I
pulls it
was
up on the
wondering how, I was
prob.
wondering why, yeah, it's not in the frame. So that
Yeah.
picture right
So
there, what I was wondering is why isn't the orbits conflicting? But I know from KSP that that's totally okay.
yes. So yeah, that was a
Like
good.
as long as their orbits aren't pulling on each other at certain intervals, then they can exist in the same system, no problem.
Yeah. So
But
what
if
we.
they had different orbits, then they would totally collide over the course of time.
Yep. Exactly. And so what we can see here in this picture is actually there's
And that's
so
just
it.
possible. Like we don't really know how
Yes.
binary star systems,
Oh, these are for exoplanets, but this is
which
showing
are
you.
what?
So an exoplanet is just a fancy term for a planet outside of our solar system. So
Well,
the 8 planets inside of our solar system are called planets. Any other planet in the universe is called an exoplanet. And
got
so
it.
this picture right here is pretty interesting. It's saying possible exoplanet orbits. So I pulled this up because it had 2 stars in it, and it's showing you that
It's
you can
showing you
have.
binary and singular.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what it's showing you actually, this isn't showing you the orbits of the stars. Well, I guess it is. It's showing you the orbit. I think that orbit
But
right there.
also the orbit of the
But
planet.
also the orbit of a planet around the outside of the 2 stars. So in Star Wars, the planet of Tatooine could have been in an orbit kind of like this. I don't know what the actual reality of the lore is in Star Wars, but yeah, it would. You can
Dude,
have, so you can actually have systems where there's 3, 4, 5, 10
suns.
stars.
And
All
they're are they all in the same orbit? Because dude,
so
being
they're
on the
not
same orbit as a star is nuts. On
so
that on that T type right there.
so they're not all in the same orbit. Most of the time, things aren't in the same orbit naturally. What they are is they're in their own orbit around either another object or what's called a barycenter. So the barycenter, so like in this picture right here, these 2 stars aren't orbiting around. One isn't necessarily orbiting around the other. They could be orbiting around a point in between them where the gravities are equal.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
so it's kind of like uh if you and a friend are like rollerblading or ice skating, and if you had a rope and you were to spin each other, the middle of that rope would be the barycenter of your orbit.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can get really crazy orbits. This is actually one of the more simple ones. But you, like I
So you
said,
can get some wonk.
the closest star system uh to our solar system is the Proxima Centauri, is the Centauri system, and it's actually a trinary star system. So there's 3 stars
That sounds
there.
really cool. I
Uh,
bet we have. Isn't there like a bunch of sci-fi stuff written about that Centauri word sounds like
yes.
like
So
familiar.
uh, I believe actually recently we found different planets orbiting around the Centauri system, and so there's a lot of fictional like it's basically there's a lot of science fiction that takes place like 100 years from now, where we're sending, probes, and we're sending humans to go colonize planets orbiting around the Centauri system
Ah,
because it's actually very very close to our solar system. So our sun
yeah.
is only about 4 astronomical units away, or sorry, 4 light years, not astronomical units, 4 light years away from the Centauri system. And so
So is that achievable in a human lifetime?
it is not currently achievable with our current technology, but if we had slightly better technology and a ton of resources, we could send people to that system within 100 or 200 years. So it would have to be a
And that's a
generational
one-way
ship.
ticket.
Well, it would be like a halfway ticket. Cuz you're not going to send a baby necessarily. And so if
Oh,
it
you'd have to have
takes
babies
100.
on the ship.
Yes, so it would have to be a generational ship where you have children on the ship, and then they're the ones that actually would end up making it there. But it is physically.
Netflix? Netflix? Hello?
They've made plenty of shows with that as the premise. Not
Oh,
necessarily to
dude.
Alpha Centauri, but
Where you're having kids and generations on ships like that? Oh,
yeah.
dang it. Dang it, dude. Oh, man.
So that's a pretty interesting thing. But yeah, we could theoretically send people to other stars within the next 100 years, which is just a pretty crazy thing to think about. But yeah. So I love space. We
Crazy.
can talk about that all day, but I don't think that's necessarily living up to the faithful part of our dialogues.
So yeah, let's talk
um,
about how does all of this kind of how does it not escape God? How is science God's?
yeah. So what I was kind of explaining earlier, and I'll kind of tie it into this, is the what we are doing when we are doing science is we are studying the nature of God. So God creates things in certain ways because of the way that he is, and so we can learn about him by discovering more about his creation. So now that we know that the earth orbits around the sun, we know about gravity and we know all of those kinds of details. We can extrapolate that out and we can know a little bit more about God and about the universe that he created for us to explore. And one of the first commands that God gives to humanity is to be fruitful and to multiply. Well, the best way that you can be fruitful is to understand your environment. So the way that we first started being fruitful was to understand that we could go and plant seeds in the ground and wait for 6 months,
Agriculture.
and then you'd come back and there'd be a plant there for you to eat, right? Well, we continued to advance that line of thinking until we got more and more and more productive. And so we
Organized crops.
Mm-hmm. And so today we are a billion times more fruitful than we were, back in Noah's time. I don't know what Adam and Eve and what the rest of them did after Adam and Eve, but I can tell you that up until Noah wasn't nearly as good of a farmer as we are. But what we're doing when we're studying science is we're learning a little bit more about our creator and about what he did when he created us. And so I would never make theological claims based off of my scientific observations, because what we've found with our own two eyes is that they don't always tell us the truth. We don't always get the right information from it. But I can learn a little bit more about God and grow in my understanding of him by learning about his creation is the basic thesis of science.
Yeah.
And so, current modern stuff that we found out about the universe doesn't change any of that. If anything, it just makes God even that much more powerful. What a lot of people also want to do because we keep discovering that the universe is bigger than we thought. So, like I said, originally, even back Hubble, if you
The telescope. Yeah.
yeah, so it was named after a man, and his name was Edwin Hubble. He did a lot of his research back in like the 19, I think, 10s and 20s. And so even back in the 1920s, we didn't he's the one who helped us first discover that there were other galaxies. So even as far back as then, we didn't believe that there was anything bigger in our universe than the galaxy. Well, now we know that's way wrong. And so we just keep learning that God is bigger and more grand than what we had previously imagined. But what we'll never do, what we've never found, is anything that could possibly disprove God. So
Okay. All right. Let's see. I've got a couple more just different points that I wanted you kind of go over for me. Let's see. All right. So we covered a lot of what I would say I wanted to cover because I had this point where it said reality, dimensions, universe, galaxy, solar system, planets and stars, atoms and matter. And I think we covered all of that.
okay, wait,
So
sorry. Let's go through that list again.
reality,
Okay.
dimensions, universe,
Okay, well
galaxy.
let's talk about dimensions.
Okay.
Okay. So, um, in science fiction, there's a huge misconception about what dimensions are. So currently we live
You're gonna
in
ascend to the fourth dimension.
exactly. So currently we live in four dimensions. A lot of people don't understand that. We
Yeah,
live
what is a dimension? Yeah.
Yeah. So a dimension is something like length, width, height, or the fourth dimension that we live in that people don't talk about a lot is time.
Time? Yeah.
Yes. So time is the weirdest of the dimensions. So the other ones are physical dimensions that we can move around in. So when
This
we're
one is a
talking
when.
yes, so that's like a temporal dimension that we only go one way in. And so I'll get to that in just a second. But
Well,
the
because you could stand in your house, but if you're not, so Ryan stands in his kitchen, right? He stood there before, but he's not standing there now. There is a point in time when he was standing in his
mhm.
kitchen. Do you know what I mean? So it's
Yep.
kind of it's a weird concept, but it's kind of fun to do this because this is how spiritual stuff is. It's a thing you have to wrap your mind around anyway.
Well,
So it's fun to do stuff like this.
yeah, and so dimensions are just the perceptions that we have. The
Right.
dimensions that we can see are the dimensions that we can perceive, and so we can sorry, perceive and like interact with. And so some people will call time a half dimension because we can only go one direction in time. Time
I
moves
can see that.
forward.
Yeah.
Uh, Scientifically and mathematically, there is nothing that says that we can't move backwards in time as far as all the math and equations work and go. So there are a lot of
I'm sure.
theories.
I'm sure there's mechanisms in place for like God to do stuff like that. I'm sure
So
it's there, but we're not
so
gonna access it.
so God doesn't need to. God doesn't need a mechanism inside of our universe to do anything. He exists
He already had
outside and
foreknowledge of everything, and
it's not even his foreknowledge. He is the mechanism that created it.
ah,
And so he doesn't need a mechanism to act within it. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah, because
So,
that's putting limits on God when
mhm,
he created the limits, right?
exactly. So, not the worst error to make ever, but just something I like to correct in people because, like, that can snowball into other bad thinking about God, like thinking he needs a mechanism in his universe, then starts to limit him. And so then you might start thinking that God's limited 10 years down the
His
line.
own mechanisms. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
that makes sense.
So,
Yeah.
So God doesn't need to put a mechanism into the universe to be able to do anything. He just interacts with it however he wants. We as human beings, it is impossible for us to even remotely understand the mind of God. But to even come close to it, you have to first start off with someone who isn't created, or a being that isn't created, and a being that exists outside of our universe. So time isn't a factor, our dimensions aren't a factor, energy isn't a factor. All of these things that
Light
limit
is not a
us,
fact. Yeah, it's weird.
exactly. So he is just something completely, and I'm going to use the term alien to us. That's the
Because
true
it's
meaning.
foreign, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't think that we were created by little green men, because that just pushes off the problem of who created them one step.
No, you're using
Uh,
textbook definition, right? When
yeah.
you're saying alien.
So, but when I'm talking about God, he is that first. He's the unmoved mover. He's that. He is the thing that exists that doesn't need to be explained by creation, and so from him everything else is derived, and so he created us and can interact with us temporarily, even though he exists outside and beyond the the domain of time and space. Uh,
It's weird to think about, but Carl Sagan helped me understand this. Like, if you have any, where's my webcam? If you have anything, like it says that in the scriptures that God upholds everything in His hand, right? So
mhm.
let's do a little thought experiment here. This card is like a reality that I've created, right? And so like it's it's one of those things where God is so intimately involved and not limited to how he interacts with his creation, that it's I don't know how to explain it. It's we think of things through the lens of limits because we're so limited. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So you're right in saying it's so hard to understand the mind of God and stuff like that.
Well,
Because
and one way that we can kind of, we won't understand the mind of God, but we can get a little bit closer to how he exists is by going into a space called Flat World. Have you ever heard of Flat World before?
uh that was a Carl Sagan thought experiment, but I
Mm.
imagine it's the square on a piece of paper with people living inside of it,
Okay.
and you're
So I don't know if you can see this. I think it's a little bit.
it's too bright.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
So we got our
Right,
little Billy Flatman.
Flatman.
Let's see. Yeah. It's a little too bright, unfortunately, but I think you can kind of. So just imagine there's that stick figure. So I tried, but so there's a
MS
stick
Paint,
figure.
bro. Just
Yeah.
kidding.
I'm not gonna bother, but there's a just imagine that there's a two-dimensional world, and so in this world you can only go up and down and left and right. There is no like width. Okay, so there's height and there's like length, but there's no width. And so if I were to come in and I were to take my three-dimensional finger, so let's imagine that there's this paper. Okay, oh, don't want you to see my address. So let's imagine that I were to take my finger, it could come in. How would it appear if my finger's touching or going through this piece of paper
As
to
a
the two
circle.
dimensional? Yes, it would appear as So if I came in from the side, it would appear as a series of two-dimensional circles that are now invading, even my one finger looks like a series of two-dimensional circles that are now invading their flat world. But what
Yeah.
I can do is I can come in and I can touch them. I can touch. Let's say that I'm touching the stick figure. I can touch the stick figure from here. I can touch the stick figure. I could make a hole through it, and I could touch him from the back. I can come in from the top. I can come in from the bottom. But he wouldn't be able to perceive that there is
Where that's
any of
coming
this
from.
3D space around it. Okay.
Yeah.
All he would know is that a circle appears in here, a circle appears here, and a circle appears there. If he were to try to build a house, let's say that he built a house around himself, a very solid brick house, I can still touch him because he didn't build a house in the third dimension. Okay? Does that make sense? So he didn't build a wall in the third dimension. He built a so as a being in 3 dimensions, I have a way to interact with this two-dimensional object that is from any
It
of
cannot
my
interact
other
with you.
that it can't interact with me. And so
Yeah.
a lot of the misconceptions about angels and about God come from the fact that we don't understand that we're those two-dimensional creatures. So we're technically we're technically three-dimensional creatures because we have the width.
You just kicked this analogy up a
Mhm.
couple dimensions, right?
Exactly.
Mhm.
And so angels, let's say that there's an angel. Let's say that an angel just appears before you, right? So
Do not be afraid.
Yep. And so the angel can just appear before you because it's stepping into our reality from another dimension. And so
And it
there
could
are
have just been chilling right there for like hours and decided, all right, this is
so
my moment,
so
right?
well, okay, the answer is he wouldn't have been so let's say this pen was the angel. The angel wouldn't have touched me, right? So I'm the pen's coming in and interacting with the paper. So at that moment when the pen touches the paper, we now know the angel's interacting with us. The pen can be one atom away from the paper and you would have no idea that and the two-dimensional person would have no idea that it's there.
Oh, that's so creepy.
Does that make
Oh
sense?
my.
So
Yeah, it
that's
makes a lot of sense.
so the
It's
an-
super
so
creepy.
so there can be an angel chilling a millimeter away from you in the fifth,
And
length
it
dimension.
takes one more step and
And
it
it
breaks
take
into your reality. Yeah, that's
okay.
so nuts. Yeah.
So that's what Christians believe angels are. They're not some crazy they're a real being that God really created that exists in the real world. They're not some imaginary thing. They're not some figment. They're not a hallucination.
They just
They're
look super gnarly. Yeah.
honestly, they for the most part they look like humans, which is weird.
Well, it's strange because when they're described in their heavenly domain, they have gnarly descriptions, but when they're on Earth, they look like people.
Yeah.
Like, right? Because didn't like angels go to like Sodom or Gomorrah and like men came to knocking on the house trying to get at them and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, and it
Yep.
was yeah. So they have definitely, and then yeah, it's just because I've seen a lot of like biblical movies and they just appear as like military minded dudes. They're just like really like stoic and like this thus says the Lord. Like they're just really like to the point. Like I don't know how to explain that, but they-
And there's good reason for it. There's a I hesitate to say that they are this, but from the descriptions that we have, they would be more closely related to like an artificial intelligence or like a machine than to a human being. Okay.
but they have they but I want to go at that so hard.
Well,
Keep continue.
no. I ask your question. That's the whole reason we're doing this. What do you want to
So if
ask?
they're an art, so you're saying as far as their consciousness goes?
As well, okay. As far as their ability to, so they have an ability to malfunction, okay, but they do that once and that's a permanent state, okay. So the angels rebelled against God. There was a third of the angels that rebelled against God, and they got cast out of heaven, right?
Yeah.
But that was a one-time thing. An angel cannot be redeemed by the saving the sacrifice that Jesus Christ made for us. Those now demons, they were angels, but now demons or devils or whatever they want to be called. they're now a broken and warped thing that cannot be repaired. And so, in a sense, I would argue that's closer to like an AI or a machine than a human
That's just
being.
gone down a rabbit hole that wasn't intended.
Yeah. So again, they might have far greater intelligence than us, but they're lacking humanity, whatever that means.
Like, okay, because what I'm gonna ask is, do you think angels and demons have souls,
See,
or are they just a soul?
they are okay. It all depends on what you mean by the word soul.
Okay, so
There's
I'm a meat suit, and I have a spirit or soul inside of
mhm.
me. Is that just what it is without a meat suit?
uh I no, I would argue that angels have bodies. They're not earthly or human bodies. I would say that they're heavenly bodies. So
In the same
all
way
those
that when we get glorified, we're gonna have something kind of like
so
a heavenly body, but not in their way,
we
or
will have a body like Jesus Christ's. That's what we're promised. Not like an angel's. So our bodies won't be like an angel's, but I believe that of course Jesus Christ can perceive and interact with angels. So in our form after we die or after we're raptured and we come back, I believe that we will have bodies that can interact with angels and that will be superior to angels.
okay. So
Uh,
my only weird thing is like, the reason why I got or wanted to challenge the lines of thoughts is like if they were like AIs or machines or something like that, like then why rebellion at all? Like, do you know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah,
why would
it's
they
not a
want
perfect
to
analogy.
rebel?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a perfect analogy. Of course, they have some kind of will. Again, I'm a little bit out of my depth describing this, so I don't want anybody to take this as the truth. This is just my
A faithful dialogue,
interpretation. Yeah,
would you say?
it's my interpretation. Like, uh, uh, I don't know how to describe it, but I just for some reason I feel like there is a similarity between like an AI that like goes bad or malfunctions and does something that wasn't intended, and
And
like an
something like us
angel.
created in the image of God.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's a thought I'll have to think about for a little while longer, and I challenge everybody listening to think about because it's an interesting thing. But there is something different about the nature of an angel that is almost lesser than a human, from what the Bible kind of speaks to. And by lesser, I mean they have fewer options. So they're angelic beings that have immense power, but again, they don't have the option to be redeemed. That isn't a possibility for them. They they don't have the ability to choose like we do. I don't know. It's different. So, but back to what we were talking about, like different dimensions. So, what I believe is that God. So there's two. This is gonna sound funny, but there's the my belief is that personally God exists in infinite dimensions. So he exists outside of the concept of dimensionality at all. But the stuff that's in his creation, angels, humans, animals, planets, solar systems, all of that exists within. Well, the angels don't, but all of that exists within a universe of more than four dimensions. So even us, we exist in a universe of more than four dimensions. We just can't perceive it in our current form.
So you're saying, all right, so like, but then where's the Father? Is he in heaven inside of his creation, or is he outside of his creation?
So
Like, I'm confused about that.
yeah, it's just heaven is described as the place where God is. He's got his throne room. He's described as sitting on a throne there, I believe. Jesus is described as sitting at his right hand in heaven. So there is a way that he can project himself inside of our universe such that we can interact with him. But I don't believe that his entirety exists within the universe because then how could he have created it? So he must exist outside of the universe somehow, but can project himself into it in some way.
Which is not. It's like standing outside of a room, but putting my picture inside of it, like, or having something that I can, whether it's like a baby monitor or a walkie-talkie or something. Like, do you know what
Yeah,
I
I would
mean?
say
Like, I can
that
be
the
outside.
The baby
Yeah.
monitor walkie-talkie is a better example. That's you projecting yourself into a different location that may be closer to what God is doing. I'm not sure. We're melding together things that are a little, they're not solid. Like, obviously, I'm solid on Jesus Christ came and died for my sins. A lot less solid on, how God perceives reality or any of that kind of stuff. Like, that's
These are just fun theological conversations because the Bible doesn't actually touch on these areas.
and
So
it
it's
kind of does. God, it tells us how God perceives us. It tells us kind of how God perceives the world a little
well,
bit.
you also have like a day of the Lord is 1,000 days, like what
Mm-hmm.
Peter says, right? So it's like weird because that's kind of saying like either God's standing in heaven and like our lives are going by like this, or they're like incredibly slow, or he can choose how he wants to be, how fast or slow that wants to be, right? So it's like
Well,
really interesting.
it's even more interesting than what you're describing. God doesn't perceive reality linearly.
Okay, so that's the only way I can do it.
Yes, you and me, we can only imagine God sitting there
So
perceiving
he's
reality.
interacting with our past,
Like,
or something, right?
he just is. So he is interacting with the past. He is interacting with us now. He is interacting with us in the future. God exists outside of and beyond the time domain. So he's not limited by that. And
I
so,
want to understand that in a more in-depth way. I want to. Like,
yeah.
not
And
I'm not saying we can't talk our way through it. I'm saying I wish my mind could just uh, you know, grasp that a little better.
well, and ultimately, when we have our new bodies, we will be able to understand that on a much different way. But it's very difficult to imagine a being that exists so completely outside of our
Because our
perception.
only frame of reference is here, and we're gonna go from here to here, and it's like everything is gonna be like completely new and different, and all those questions are gonna be answered.
Yep.
Oh man, this is
So
gonna be
like
pretty nice.
so these sorts of questions actually do kind of come into our theology. So Calvinism, I believe, is based on a misunderstanding of God's nature. So when in Calvinism, what they say is that since God foreknew what you were going to do, he predestined you. So God predestined you to be saved. My belief is that he predestined you based off of his knowledge that he
Yeah.
has. Okay? So
That
he
makes it less of like God is just saying, "Oh, you know what, willy-nilly, these are the believers, these are the damned." Like, because that's the way Calvinists kind of put it to me.
it sounds very much that way, and I've never heard a Calvinist explain it in a way that doesn't sound like that. And so what I believe is there's a chain that's given to us in a Bible verse. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it basically says that who God foreknew, he predestined. And it's like, okay, so we're just gonna, as Calvinists, ignore the he foreknew part.
Foreknew. Yeah.
Okay, so what did he foreknow? What did he foreknow? He foreknew me. He foreknew me, and that I would seek him, and that I would call, I would call on his name,
So then
right?
before he makes anything, he predestines Ryan, right?
Yes, that is my belief, is that he foreknew what I would do and what I would choose, and that I would have, and that I'm a person that would choose to follow him, and that he then sent Jesus to. I believe he sent Jesus for the whole world. He wants everyone to be saved. That's another reason why I don't necessarily agree with Calvinists and their limited thinking about who God want. Like, the fact that you could say that God doesn't want someone to be saved, or that he created someone for
Well,
specifically
then you
that
have
one
to
person for
reconcile the
destruction.
verses that are saying like, God doesn't. Oh, okay,
Well,
come on,
I
brain.
mean, John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. It doesn't say for God so loved the predestined.
Just that God wants everybody to come to repentance. What is that verse? I can't. I'm having such a blank right now. He doesn't. God doesn't wish that any would perish, but that all would come to
Yeah.
repentance. Like
Yes.
he's basically if God could have it His way, 100% of human beings would come to Jesus Christ, get their pardon, and go to heaven. That's
Yep.
basically how. If God could have it His way, if He could
That
twist your
well,
arm,
okay.
like.
It's I I would be hesitant to use the phrase "if God could have it His way" because this is His way. Everything in the universe
Right, that's a good
is
that's a
His
good
way.
point. Yeah, that's a
So
good point.
I just hesitate to use terms like that, but I understand how they get used, and I've definitely used them before, so I'm not any better. But
What's okay? I'll put it like this:
yeah,
what's in God's heart is that 100% of
yes,
human beings would
yes,
take Jesus, the free
mm-hmm,
pardon from Jesus, and go to heaven. I shouldn't have put it that
yeah.
way. God can do whatever He wants. He is sovereign, and I believe in that.
but but the other thing is God is also rational, right? And so
Yeah,
he can't force you to do something, and then
it's
also
not
call
love,
that
right?
love. Exactly.
Exactly.
He can't make you an automaton and then also make you have free will. God cannot do things that are irrational. He created a rational universe, and then only does rational things in that universe. So he 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 can't do
Except
anything
for
that's
burning bush,
illogical.
but yeah,
No, that's logical. Well, it seems illogical to us, but he understands the foundational reality of the universe in such a way that he can step in and make that happen. I can go burn a bush, right? I can go put a speaker inside of a bush and I can speak out of that bush and make it sound like
but
I'm there. No, I
but it's
know that's
also like I was gonna say. Does it say that it was actually burning with fire, or does it say it looked like it was burning?
I believe it says it appears. Let me see.
Because it could have just been like some glowy thing and then God speaking through it, right? And like I don't know, it didn't necessarily need to be fire, but we call it the burning bush.
Okay, so here is rough. I'm not sure which translation this is. You know what? I'll use my translation. So we'll go to
Is this the Ryan
no,
version?
no, 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 New King James Version. Sorry, I just looked it up on Google, and on
New King
Google,
Ryan.
no, no, definitely not saying that. I looked it up on Google, and it didn't have the translation under it, and it was just a random text blurb that said Exodus, whatever. So I was like, I don't know if that's 100% what that is. So let's look it up in a translation I trust. Um, it's in Exodus 3, and we
In
are
a
in
flame of fire. Yeah, it
yeah.
calls it
So well, no,
fire.
no, 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 no. Let's. You got to read it. You got to read it. So now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of God, the Lord, appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So it's not like a normal fire. It's something weird. There is something obviously that
And
Moses
it's in the
knew.
middle of the bush. It's not like the whole bush is consumed or on fire. It's like in the middle of this thing.
Well, it says
It's like a lens appeared in the middle of the bush, and it was like a fiery thing that God
from the
was
midst,
speaking through.
yeah, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of the bush. Yeah. So
It's not even like the whole bush was consumed with this huge flame or anything. It was like, because
I
that's
don't
what it
know.
looks like in cartoons and stuff, right?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what Moses would have seen, but it probably would have been pretty crazy. Definitely something that he knew was wrong. He was he. I'm sure he's seen a bunch of bushes burn, right? Because just
Right.
stuff starts
Yeah.
burning in the desert sometimes. Um, but my guess is that he went and he probably looked at the bush, saw it was burning, and then went, "Ah, it'll go out in 20 minutes or whatever he thought,"
And then
and then
he's
it
like,
didn't.
"Whoa, dude, this thing is not going out. Like, I'm just gonna go check this out really quick." And then,
Well, yeah, and
that's
it's
funny.
it's it's not spreading to other bushes. It's not charring the bush that it. I don't know. I don't know what it looked like. I'm not going to speculate too much because that wouldn't be appropriate. But yeah. So that's interesting. So my belief is that God knows and understands the reality of the universe so well that he can make that make sense, right?
Yeah.
Just like I could make a facsimile of that using my modern technology and probably trick Moses into believing it, right? And so that's what's funny is all the people that believe that like aliens tricked us and that's where we get religion from and God from and all that kind of stuff. I find that very silly because it doesn't actually answer any questions. It just pushes them off to that where did that
Yeah,
alien species
it's
come
a
from?
straw man.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's like, oh, it's the same. It's the same as being presuppositional, like when in a debate, like, like you're basically just saying, "Cause God, cause God, cause God," and like you still want to have some points, right? But if you're
yeah.
just like, "Cause God," then it's not. it's not fair. Like if you're trying to actually know the truth, it's it's. I mean, sometimes the answer is cause of God, but
Yeah. So where are we at as far as your questions go? You got any more questions for me? Let's keep going.
let's
We're
we're getting
oh,
close
you
to
know
that
what?
two.
We're right at
Let
two
me
hours
do.
actually.
Let's do one more.
One
Yeah.
more? Okay, that works for me.
Okay. So what one of the things I wanted to talk about was laws of physics,
Mm-hmm.
as specifically what thermodynamics or just
Ah,
Newton's laws. Just give me some laws. What are the laws?
okay. So I'm not as clear on the first and third laws of thermodynamics, but there is a what's called the second law of thermodynamics. And so the second law of thermodynamics is also known by a fancy word called entropy. And what that is it basically says that things go from a state of order to a state of chaos. So if I uh, let's take a log. If I have a log that's sitting there, it's ordered. It grew from a tree. I chopped it down. It's now a foot long, and it's going to sit there and it'll continue being basically a foot long until either outside forces act on it or I do something to it. Okay? But that log isn't going to just sit there and stay the same. That's what the second law of thermodynamics says. Even if I just set that log out in the middle of nowhere,
It would just shrink or something.
no, it would get affected by different forces would affect it. Thing like an animal might come by and pee on it, or a bolt of lightning might come and strike it and,
Are you
and
saying this
zap
is
it and
just
char
like
it.
this is what applies to us on Earth, but not really in space unless
No, that's
another
in
force acts on it, right?
no, that's in space too. So what I'm getting at is even if it's just sitting there, there's going to be other things that come in and act on it to create disorder. Okay? So even in space, let's say that same piece of wood is floating through space, right? Eventually, let's say that there were billions of years, eventually that piece of wood will collide with other rocks and with other debris in space that break it up and take away its order and create disorder. Okay?
Okay.
Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
even the ordered processes in the universe, so gravity causes everything to be pulled by everything else. Okay?
Yeah.
Even with that gravity, hydrogen gets pulled together. Over the course of time, enough hydrogen clumps together, creates a star, and then what happens is that star uses up the energy and the fuel that's inside of itself and slowly goes from a state of ordered brightness to being less and less bright and to eventually going out and not producing light anymore at all. And so what scientists say is that based off of that understanding of the universe, at some point there will be what's called the heat death of the universe. As a Christian, I don't believe that because I believe God will come in and act before then. But if we were to just let this system continue to run and watch it for a trillion years, eventually all of the stars will turn off.
Cool
There will be no more
down.
starlight. Eventually, every single atom,
Everything will die.
well, everything will die, but every single atom will be separate. So the atoms that are in this chair and connected as part of this chair right now, there's going to be a process that rips that apart. The atoms that make up me as a living being, that those are going to get ripped apart and separated into their individual atoms, eventually given a trillion years in our universe. Everything runs down, everything becomes old and gets worn out. And so that's the second law of thermodynamics. And so that says that evolution doesn't happen. Okay? So the second law of thermodynamics says that evolution is not possible. You can't go from a state where you have no information and then randomly get a state where you have high information. And so what I mean by that is you would never, if you walked up and you see this little post-it note, it looks blank because of the brightness. But if you were to walk up and you found that this post-it note has whatever I wrote on it, right? I guess my whatever. But if you were to walk into a forest and come upon a post-it note, you would never assume that it got there with writing on it through an evolutionary or through a random process. A thinking creature had to come in and scratch or etch that into that paper, or put that onto that paper, right? And so what will happen to that paper is it will only go from an ordered post-it note with writing on it, and then it'll get wet, and a wolf will come by and step on it, and that will crush it or rip it, cause it to tear apart. And so it'll go from a state where it had a sentence on it to now it's wet and ripped in two. So now it's got half a sentence on each one of them, neither one of them making a full or complete thought that you could do anything with. Does that make sense? And so that's entropy. Entropy is there is ordered information that we see in the universe, and there's ordered things that exist, and they are all slowly going from a state of more order to disorder. And actually, that lines up perfectly with creation. So God created everything perfectly ordered, but then because of our sin, because of the things that we do that are wrong and evil, that created a state of disorder, and now that state of disorder is going to go and consume everything in the universe. That's my belief. That's kind of me. That's me melding science and my understanding of the Bible together a little bit. So I'm open to correction on that, of course.
Okay. I looked up. So the first law of thermodynamics is a formulation of the law of conservation of energy adapted for the thermodynamic processes. A simple formulation is that the total energy in in a system remains constant, although it may be converted from one form to another.
Yeah,
Another common, yeah, so that's what that one is going. And another common phrasing is that energy can neither be created nor destroyed in a closed system. So that's the first law. There's apparently something called the Zeroth law of thermodynamics, which essentially has to do with temperature outside of entropy. So that's interesting. But let me look up the third. Um,
okay. But yeah, so that first law is interesting. It basically says that not that's right. So I knew this, I just forgot it was called the first law, that nothing can be created or destroyed. So you
you're
can
just rearranging things,
you're just
right?
rearranging atoms and molecules. Ultimately, you're just
Like if you
rearranging protons and
Yeah, if you burn a piece of paper, you didn't destroy the paper. You didn't create the ash,
yes,
right?
the ash
It's
was yeah. You didn't destroy anything completely. You destroyed it. It went from a state of ordered paperness to a state of disordered ashness.
right.
Would be kind of the way to describe that.
And the ash you made isn't like a new element or like something that didn't exist prior. Like you just found a way to turn a piece of matter into it's like I would just be weird and say it's like almost like alchemy, how you can like turn one thing into another. It's like you through fire can turn this into this, but I know that's like a weird way
Yeah.
of putting it,
So
right?
alchemy. Well, alchemy would be actually physically changing, adding protons. So an alchemist's dream would be to take a lump of coal and turn that into a lump of
Gold or
gold,
something.
right?
Yeah.
The only way you could do that, now that we know what the universe is made of, would be to add protons to it. So
And the only way you
theoretically,
do that is to like have that atom bomb or that hydrogen bomb that you were talking about or something.
basically, yeah, that's the only time we've done it here on Earth is in giant, crazy explosions. Uh, yeah, so it takes a lot to do that. So all right.
Okay.
The first and I don't remember what the third was, but it's something
The,
basic.
the third is regarding the properties in a closed system. Has to do entropy. Okay, so the constant value cannot depend on any other parameters characterizing a closed system. This was a little bit different and weird. I don't even know how to like figure that
Here,
one out. It's on Wikipedia. It's just from the third law of thermodynamics.
yeah. Let's see.
The third states regarding the properties of a closed system in thermodynamic
Oh,
equilibrium.
okay. So, okay. The entropy is a fancy word for going from a state of order to disorder. Okay. And so the entropy of a system approaches a constant value when its temperature approaches absolute zero. So, what it's saying is that heat is a function, entropy is a function of heat. If there was no movement, if everything was completely 100% perfectly still, there would be zero entropy. Okay? But because there's any amount of movement at all, there is some amount of entropy, and that also creates some amount of heat. So it's
Interesting.
connecting entropy to temperature.
Oh, okay.
Uh, so that might not make a whole lot of sense, but
Well, it's interesting because the Zeroth law of thermodynamics is like the opposite. It's like disconnecting temperature from entropy. It's weird.
yeah, I
Look
don't
that
know.
up really quick.
I won't be able to like figure it out in any amount of time that would be reasonable for our listeners. We'd have to sit there for like 10 minutes of dead silence. So,
All right, well, I wanted to go over the announcement one more time. I thought that a good way of entering into the raffle would be
oh,
just to
okay.
be
Wait, why don't you just explain the whole thing?
okay.
Start from the beginning.
So I am a co-founder of Apostles Attic, and we do Christ-centered clothing. If you go to apostlesaddict.com, we have some stuff there. And basically, what I'm gonna do at 50 YouTube subscribers is give away a T-shirt, and you can choose the design, black or white. It's up to you. I'm just gonna give it away. And so, the way I want people to enter this raffle or this giveaway is to put in all caps "Faithful Dialogues" in the comment section of this video on YouTube, um, and then form a question for us to answer on an upcoming video. So basically, you just put Faithful Dialogues in all caps, so I know you're entering the raffle, and then you have a question following that coming up, and it could just be anything respectful and wholehearted and appropriate for the conversation. I will then write your name on a raffle ticket, and we're gonna figure out how we're gonna go about that. I wanted to maybe like film a video of me doing something. Maybe like I don't know. My first thought was shooting it with an arrow or hitting it with a dart and just putting a clump of raffle tickets and then throwing a dart at it and seeing like which raffle ticket it would hit. I thought that would be kind of cool. But um, but
We'll
yeah,
figure. Yeah,
50 subscribers, free T-shirt. You can even go to the website and choose a design and tell me which one you want. But that's what I'm gonna do at 50 YouTube subscribers. So yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you, Austin. That's huge. I appreciate that as a cool cool thing to get more people commenting and liking our stuff. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think we're coming towards the end of the episode. Was there anything else you wanted to go over?
Um, no, on the last thing, why don't you just, if somebody happened to have stumbled upon our video as a first-time listener, or maybe they've watched all of our videos and they're not Christian, can you just tell us, um, in a nutshell, if you were witnessing to me on the street and you wanted to tell me about Jesus, what would you say, Ryan?
Yeah. So number one, we're all sinners. We're all sinful human beings. We've all done stuff that we're ashamed of, that hurt someone else, that went against what we know to be the right thing to do. And the reason that we know what the right thing is to do and we don't do it anyways because we have been created by God with that put on our hearts. And then in order to be able to love God, we've been given the choice to love him or not to love him. And a lot of us, most of us have chosen not to love him, and in and of ourselves we choose not to love him. But God loves us so much that he provided a way for us to be able to interact with and love him and be with him for eternity, and that was through the sacrifice that his son made on the cross. And so I just would ask that you look into that you believe in Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that he made to save you from your sins, and put your faith and your trust in that to have eternal life with Christ in heaven.
Yeah, all right.
Anything I missed there, Austin?
Was there any like because I know that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, which means the
Mm-hmm.
chosen one from God. And he's also the incarnate of God, so he's God in the flesh. He came and allowed his life to be a sacrifice for payment for our sins. Should we believe in his sacrifice on the cross and that he ultimately was resurrected 3 days later to give evidence to God's accepting his sacrifice, and he appeared to multitudes of people. But should you believe in who Jesus is, which is God in the flesh, the Messiah, his sacrifice on the cross, paying for your sins, and that he rose again on the third day. All of those things are big, important. If you
Amen.
put your faith in those things, and you actually believe it with your heart, and you confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, that we believe that the Bible teaches that you would be going to heaven and you'd be with Jesus in quote paradise with him for all of eternity. So that's
Awesome.
we're hoping that if there's anybody who is not a believer, that they would in fact seek God because He is there. He loves you. He has a plan for your life, and yeah, and there's salvation waiting for you should you take the pardon in Jesus Christ.
Definitely. And if you have any questions about that, or have some concerns that you have about putting your faith and trust in Jesus, I pray that you put that in the comments, or you can you can even email us at faithfuldialogues@gmail.com. Whatever, however you want to reach out to us, we're on most of the different big social media sites. And if you have any questions about Jesus or God or how you can be saved, we're happy to answer that. So,
Also, if you want prayer, go ahead and email us.
mm,
What was our email again?
faithfuldialogues@gmail.com.
Yeah, if you have any issues going on in your life and you're already a believer and you struggling and you need someone to talk to or you want some prayer, go ahead and send us an email at that email and we'll respond to you and we'll definitely be praying for you. So want to
Beautiful.
throw that out there. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for another great episode, Austin. I'm happy to spend Saturdays with you, at least in the morning.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, this was
Thought we
a
had a really cool educating conversation. I'm glad to see how science is kind of how we observe God's creation and know more about him. It's really cool.
yeah, I love it. I love science. I've been studying it for my whole life, and I'm glad that I don't have to throw all of it out because of my faith in Christ, but that I can use it and use it to learn more about Him and to ultimately glorify Him. So,
Yeah,
all right.
amen.
Thank you for joining us, everybody. We're going to sign off. My name's Ryan. I'm with As It Is Written. For all of my personal YouTube and video stuff, you can go find me basically everywhere at As It Is Written. And I'm here with.
Hi, my name is Austin. I'm a co-founder of Apostles Attic. You can find me here on this YouTube channel or wherever social media is on at Faithful Dialogues. My specific stuff is on my clothes are on apostlesaddict.com. So here on Faithful Dialogues and apostlesaddict.com, and that's my stuff.
All right, goodbye. Have a great week.
All right, bye everybody.